Thank you very much, Felix, for your introduction. And today I'm going to talk not so much about my science, but about my experience as a member of the steering committee and my recollections of these 5 years that I worked with both of you, Barbara and Felix. And to start with, I want to thank Jane and Georg for inviting me to talk about my memories. Anyway, but how is that I got there? I mean, how is that they invited me? So I have to talk a little bit about from windspread to the NRP 50. And this is at the point, as Pete said, Theo Colborn conducted the Great Lakes Survey and finding developmental, behavioral, reproductive, and endocrine alterations in fishes, birds, and mammals. Now, if the anomalies that she saw were due to the hormonal effects of already banned chemicals, DDT, PCBs, etc., there was nothing to do except to wait until further lowering of the toxicant levels. And there is where something happened, like many things happen in life, hazard play a role. And I was talking at Tufts University. We had a great president called Jean Mayer that he started something called the Center for Environmental Management that was funded by EPA. So there we were talking about something that by accident happened to us, Carlos Sonnenschein and I, that is that all of a sudden our experiments didn't work anymore because they were contaminated with estrogens. So the control and the cells treated with estrogens were exactly identical, when before it was a difference of 6-7-fold. So we had to figure out what happened to the experiments, and it was that plastic shed an estrogen into the components of the tissue culture. So what happened is that a friend of hers was present in this inside presentation. It was a closed-door presentation to the EPA people that were funded our center. And so a friend of hers, Sharon Green, was there. And after my talk, she came to me and said, would you be able to talk to a friend of mine? She would be very happy to hear what you have to say. I said, well, of course. So 1 week later, Theo called me. And it was exactly, she wanted to know what was the new estrogen that wasn't regulated and was already in the environment. So I told her it's nonylphenol. We are not certain. I mean, it could be nonylphenol, octylphenol as well. And, but this is used in the synthesis of certain detergents. And that is the interesting thing, a group in Switzerland headed by Walter Giger at EWAG, found out that it degrades and the detergents degrade and is concentrated in sludge. So there comes my first contact with Switzerland. So we discovered nonylphenol, and there we say, even in the summary, that these compounds, like alkylphenol polyethoxylates, may be potentially harmful to exposed humans and the environment at large. Well, and then, of course, what we say is that anaerobically stabilized sludge here is degraded to free nonylphenol in rodent models, as well as in sewage sludge. And so I told her all these things on the phone because the paper wasn't already published. And moreover, that actually this nonylphenol polyethoxylate is used as a spermicidal, and it degrades in mammals, so you get exposed to bisphenol A. So that was something that brought me to what was windspread. And there is Giger's paper. And so my first contact. And then once I was in windspread, the other important thing that happened to me is that Pete was in my group, and he was the president of W. Alton Jones, and he offered me money, not there, but a phone call afterwards, to do the same thing, I mean, use the assay that we were using to check chemicals that are produced in large volumes and are in the environment. And there is where my career starts, to first find nonyl phenol with Carlos, and then to screen these 150 chemicals, from which we found about 20 that were estrogenic. Anyway, so we started there, and then NIH had a role because they had a call in 1996, and there is our dear friend Jerry, that was the program director. So I got money from NIH to study females, where we discover problems like fertility, compromised fertility at the lowest doses of bisphenol A ever tested at that moment, and other, from cancer to behavioral problems, etc. So there is where we were, and this is just a little summary of the history of endocrine disruptors, starting with Silent Spring to today. And you would see, I mean, in gray, I mean, the scientific discoveries are in kind of peach color, like here. Sorry, it is in gray. So this is how chemicals were discovered to produce hormonal effects. And here is how we had committee meetings and different programs started. And you see that all these documents and if ever legislation took place, goes with a retardation of 30 years, 20 years, something like that. So, and here, I think that we have Giga with his discovery, and the other important people I have to still mention, that is Margaret Schlumpf and Walter Lichtensteiger, that found UV filters to be estrogenic. And when they found that, they started to talk to the Swiss government to get a program on endocrine disruptors. So we are here today because of all these people that I already mentioned. I hope I didn't forget anyone of the people that were instrumental. And there will be more of them showing up here later. So here we have the NFP 50 that was run between 2002 and 2007. I think it was 1 year before that Barbara called me to tell me that whether I would accept to be in the steering committee. And yeah, the rest is history, but I have to recount it, even if I am not a historian. And so I was asked to talk about my personal experience by Jane as a member of the steering committee. So here I have to thank Barbara and Felix for providing documents. And so I'm using their slides here, and although in this case the text is mine. So you will see this design. Those are the real historical ones, because it said the official things that were said about this program. And for example, this is the aims of the National Research Program: to develop scientific strategies to assess the risks and hazards of endocrine disruptors, to define a set of rules for future development of pertinent substances, to create consensus platforms for science, industry, and authorities to avoid the negative impact of endocrine disruptors. And they put 15 million Swiss francs, which is not a little amount of money, especially 20 years ago. So the International Steering Committee was presided by Felix, and I think that he was wonderful, because we know that you cannot hurt scientists at all, but you can put them together just being a good leader, and that is what Felix was doing with us. So the members were Susan Jobling, Konrad Ungerbühler, Michael Oehme, Urs Röeg. All those are Swiss people, with exception of Sue. And then myself and Christoph Studer, that was also instrumental because he was in the Federal Office of the Environment and a friend of Margaret and Walter. And then Professor Vos from the Netherlands. So that was the group, and we had to do a lot of work, as usual. The implementation officer was Dr. Trachsel, and then we had a supervision by Isabel Rodite from the University of Weimar. So the members had to work evaluating the applications, defining what the application should be about, et cetera, et cetera. And we approved 30 research projects, and some of them produce very, very important results. So I just hope I won't take more time than needed, but the very original thing there was the creation of consensus platforms, because the idea was to make scientific discoveries, set up a program that would get young people interested in endocrine disruptors, and have therefore a group of people that will be working on this for years to come. And then what to do with this by putting together scientists, authorities, and industry to see whether we could create a situation where it would be more efficient and to handle the regulation of these chemicals if necessary. So that was in a nutshell, the story. And here are the results. Some of the things were absolutely interesting, and here I should recall that Felix had to work with the military for years until the project could be implemented, the sperm count story. It was a very important project that resulted in finding out that only 38% of this population of young men had sperm concentration, motility, and morphology that met the WHO semen reference criteria. So that was a big survey. It was very important, and also a relationship between exposure of the mother and the effect on these young men. So that was one of the things, probably the one that everyone got to know because it made a big wave in the press. Then the other thing that I think was very important was that there were new chemicals that were discovered. And like, for example, several UV filters, and there are Margaret and Walter, I'm seeing them there, that were instrumental in discovering those. And also, there were measurements of exposure in breast milk, etc., in aqueous environment. And then there was an attempt to do risk assessment for the identification of hotspot chemicals in the environment, including a project in the Lake Thun, where it was found that males that were having defects in their gonads had been exposed. It was the plankton that produced that, not the endocrine disruptors that we suspected would be present there. So it was a very productive project, very well run. And here are the many papers by Margaret and Walter on this UV screens. I would say that then I got to read a document, thanks to Barbara and Felix, that was radar. It was like the consequences of the project as seen in 2011, I think. And it talks about people in government being interested in regulating, but I don't know what happened, because that is motions to regulate BPA in baby bottles and a bunch of things of that sort. So I would like, if there are people from the government here, that I imagine they are, that will eventually tell us what happened, because I couldn't find all these documents. Again, I'm not a historian, but there were those attempts to regulation, and there was also voluntary retirement of one of those screens from the industry that decided not to use them here. So there were some consequences. And then there is a very relevant entity that grew out of the NFP 50, and that wasn't what Jane was expecting, but that is how I see her FPF. Because Jane, I met Jane when I was in the steering committee. Why? Because she was first a graduate student with one of the persons that we funded, okay, here at the EHT, and also she did her work at the EWAG, okay? And since then, she obviously got very interested in endocrine disruptors, plastics, and the like, and she funded FPF. And since then, we have had a lot of important work with important consequences done by this FPF. And we have to congratulate her for that and the people that work there. The last one is taking care of 921 substances that were published as being potential mammary carcinogens. They further work on that and found that 189 had been measured in food contact materials. And then when you look at the ones that can migrate, then you find 76, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's showing that through contact with plastics, we are exposed to mammary carcinogens. And as you know, there has been an increase on the diagnosis of breast cancer in young women. So I think that this could be seen as a consequence of this project, and a very important one. Now, this is okay. Now let's talk about regulation, and that is a lot sadder because it moves at geological time speed. So we get a little frustrated. I mean, since 1987, when we found nonylphenol, we didn't know what it was in 1987, estrogen in plastic, we immediately said, oh, this shouldn't be in baby bottles. And it took about 10 years before the French stopped using bisphenol A in baby bottles, for example. So there is this delay. And you know some of the reasons for that is, number one, science and society. You know them, I don't have to mention them. And then there's the ones inside science. There is a theoretical crisis in biology. The science for the sake of science shouldn't be confused with science applied to human health. There are two different things, and the criteria to do one and the other and extract consequences from one and the other should be very different. I don't have time to work on, to mention all the details, but we can go over that at the moment of discussion if you want, because the way we should see how you get data and interpret it for the sake of science and how you do for public health or for medicine are totally different. Okay, but I have to finish in 20 minutes, so. Well, what happens when researchers let the marchants of doubt set the agenda? And it's very tempting for us, biologists or scientists, to go back to the bench as they tell us to do. But we don't need to know mechanistic details in order to regulate. Just think of castration. I mean, the eunuchs that were protecting harems about 5,000 years ago. Or the animals that were castrated in order to get bigger. Where is the mechanism? However, it's very effective, right? So we should use different criteria. That is the whole problem. And not be reacting like a conditioned reflex to go immediately back to the bench. That is not what we should be doing. We should be doing something different, that is to evaluate when enough is enough. That is the story. That is, enough is enough, then we have to act. And we should be vocal about that. Because there is very important, if you are going to err, it's better to err on the precautionary side. So it's totally different than if you are Galileo thinking of the principle of inertia, that then from him to Newton was 100 years, okay? But nothing happened because nobody had in mind to move the orbit of the Earth, change it. I mean, no consequences. So you can take 100 years or more to figure out what's going on. Okay, so, but is light at the end of the tunnel? Well, in October 2020, the European Commission published a chemical strategy for sustainability. And in it, we are promised that endocrine disruptors will be regulated, right? And it would ensure that endocrine disruptors are banned in consumer products as soon as they are identified. Okay. Voila, that was wonderful. But, not surprisingly, resistance from the usual suspects is already materializing. So endocrinologists should be ready to oppose the delayed tactics, armed with a clear understanding of when enough is enough. And for example, if you check Le Monde, the French newspaper, there is an article September 27, another 28, and another 29, that is telling us how the US is interfering with the European Green Deal. So this is just to tell you why we are regulation is going to geographical velocity. Now, to end this, biology also has to do something else besides understanding regulation and the imminency of taking action. And that is that since the big theories were created, like the evolutionary theory and the cell theory a long time ago, we are not constructing new theories that are needed. And science is about theories because we don't have a direct way to look at reality. We cannot observe reality spontaneously because we are inside of the world. So that is epistemology, and I'm not going to go further on this, but that is the problem. So in order to create some sort of objectivity, you have to have a theoretical frame. And right now, there is a movement that we call the New Biology, just because Phil Ball wrote a book that was published very few months ago that says, the title is How Life Works, a guide for the new biology. And he's talking about all these changes that have been operating for the last 10 years, say, in which people are trying to go back to criticize all theories and make them relevant to today's knowledge, and also to create a new theory of organisms that we do not have that will cover the whole life cycle. This is needed because in our field, I mean, it's needed in biology, that's for sure, but it's needed also in endocrine disruptors and endocrinology, because we need those principles to provide a useful framework for experimentation and for explaining phenomena arising from endocrine disruptors, like the new phenotypes we are describing. And theorization is also necessary to buttress empirical results and to provide means to close uncertainty gaps that can be exploited to slow the march of the merchants of doubt. And I think I will stop here, but not without first thanking again Barbara, Felix, Margaret, Walter, and obviously Jane. To talk about this. I'm not a historian, so this is just my recollections. Please take it as it is.